I want to reintroduce my friend Johanna Drucker, who is the Bernard and Martin Breslauer Professor of Bibliography at UCLA in the Department of Information Studies, where I am also an adjunct faculty member. Johanna's interests are the history of the book, alphabet historiography, modeling interpretation for electronic scholarship, digital aesthetics, and the design of information visualization. Johanna founded a new program at UCLA in digital humanities. This was the first, they're just coming to the end of the first academic year of the digital humanities program at UCLA, which is an undergraduate degree program and a graduate certificate program. And I guess it's been a big success this year. Yeah, so that's, I know that a lot of my students are excited about that program. Anyway, Johanna is just an expert at helping us think about all this stuff, so I'm going to hand the podium over to her.
Thanks so much. I just want to say I can't really take credit for the Digital Humanities program. I mean, Todd Presner, Peter Lunenfeld, other people have been there a lot longer than I have getting it going, but it's great to have it going. It's great to be able to talk about the portal, and I'd like basically to cover some of the ways in which the portal is radical and revolutionary and go fairly systematically through the conceptual, the technical, the institutional, and some of the social ramifications of the way in which the portal's innovations are going to play out. And utopian, optimistic as I am, I also think it's a moment for some reflection on the realities of what is going to be involved in trying to build and sustain such an ambitious project, and to recognize some of the efforts that to some extent disappear in such a large project. When I came up with the title for my talk, I suggested that the portal might be considered a kind of panoptic virtual node in the knowledge base of art history. I don't know what I was thinking. And, but those are pretty much old terms, and what I want to do is shift each one of those terms as I talk into a term that's more contemporary. The notion of the panoptic, which comes out of a legacy of thinking about information access, surveillance, and control as a spatialization of knowledge, really has to be rethought as an informatics rather than a panoptics. We actually don't see in the digital environment. We have access. And that access is not to a virtual simulacral world, but it's actually to a digital environment that's highly structured and therefore capable of certain kinds of activities, behaviors, and processing. Likewise, we're not actually talking about a node when we're talking about the portal. We're talking about a point of access. And it's a point of access that isn't to a specific knowledge base, but to a networked, federated assembly of materials. And so thinking about each of those things, again, makes us understand what a remarkable conceptual leap the design of this project is. It's not unique. We have other federated portal environments, but the notion of the federated portal and the notion of working in a federated way is something that could only come about at a point of maturation in the cycle of digital humanities. 20 years ago, we were building repositories, and we were learning how to build repositories. And most of those repositories were built in individual institutions and according to the exigencies, knowledge, specificity, and needs of the particular constituencies involved. And that's means that we have cultural legacy now of materials that can be federated, but with that comes some of the challenge that we see in the technical side of this project. Metadata is not standardized. Scanning and digitization are not standardized. Formats for display and delivery are not standardized. Even the relationship between repositories, that is the sort of inventory of scanned files and materials, and the delivery mechanisms within which they are used is not standardized. So essentially what we're looking at is a kind of culture in which there's kind of like idiosyncratic plumbing in every individual institutional environment. So there's a lot to think about when we start to think about how to crosswalk and interconnect these legacy materials, and then to establish terms for going forward with the sustained extension of this activity. At the same time, we don't want to lose some of the things that come out of cultural legacy. I, for instance, like many people in this room, began my research at a time when you went to the Bibliothèque Nationale, first you went through the card catalogs, then you went to the written catalogs, then you went back to these handwritten ledgers of inventories of acquisitions, right? I mean, you went through all of these things. They each had a material richness to them and characteristics that we want to think about as we migrate data out of its material physical past and into accessible formats online. And again, the full facsimile aspect of most of the materials that are accessible through the portal is respectful of that particular material richness. The other thing we want to think about before I move into this conceptual, technical, institutional, and social analysis of the portal is to be wary of expectations. There's a wonderful little YouTube video, or a monstrous, hideous YouTube video, depending on how you think about it, of a child who's pre-symbolic, right? Can't talk, barely can walk, you know, they're kind of balancing on that little diaper bottom. And it's been given a mass circulation magazine. Why, I do not know. And so the child's sitting there, a little splay-legged around the, you know, pages of Vogue, and looking at the magazine, it's not turning the pages, it's hitting the pages in order to swipe the surface of the printed magazine. Okay, so somewhere between the Bibliothèque Nationale and the activity of this child, our expectations have to come into line. You know, we need to think about what it is that our current environment has made us believe we should instantly have available as a set of services and activities in any particular online resource. That said, the other thing to think about here is, why do we need the portal if you can Google? Why is a portal not a search engine? Excuse me. Why is Kmart not a specialized boutique? So basically, if you're interested in the specialized knowledge domains and you want your access to material to be vetted, authoritative, and specific, you don't go to Kmart and sort of say, hey, I'd really like a full sable brush to do my esoteric watercoloring with that's a $100 brush. You're going to spend your whole day in Kmart or week in Kmart, and you're not going to find it. So this kind of like, hey, there's the expectation problem again. If you can Google, why portal? Because they're completely different things. A search engine is not a controlled environment. And again, all of us who know from trying to find things in the Google environment know that it's basically the needle in the haystack problem. That said, one of the challenges ahead, and I'm putting this mildly, is going to be the problem of scale. And how will this project scale? And what kinds of faceted browsing and more elaborate natural language processing middleware is going to be necessary to digest the large corpus of material that's going to end up within this portal environment. So that said, let me go back to my little outline of conceptual, technical, institutional, and social aspects of the portal and why they're so radically transformative and why this is such an interesting moment. In some ways, the portal is both radical and conservative, and I think that's right. I think that that's befitting an institution like the Getty. And by conservative, I mean that it is a well-defined project with a particular set of goals and objectives that have to do with holding the center of art history. The notion that what we collect at this point in time as major institutions is not objects, but access, is one radical move. We don't collect objects, we collect access. We provide access, but we collect it. So that shift from the idea that what a collection consists of is things to the idea that what a collection consists of is pointers to things that stay stable is also representative of a mature condition and a faith in the maturity of the condition of digital resources, that addresses will remain, that locations will remain, that digital materials will have some degree of stability for the foreseeable future ahead. It's a leap of faith, but it does represent, again, a kind of point of maturity. But that shift from objects to access is significant. So this redefinition also changes the way that we do our work. Of course, we saw those wonderful demonstrations this morning of these searches that can be performed, the kinds of desires for computational processing of material, of data mining, of text analysis, of context analysis that will allow us to work effectively in these large-scale environments. Again, another major change from the kind of traditional environment is the relationship between metadata and objects. If you look at the history of libraries, in antiquity, the libraries were already large enough to require significant amounts of surrogates. Libraries and museums, but libraries in particular, used the physical space to organize collections in a logical, reasonable, and rational way so that things could be found. Now, of course, our difficulty in the current environment is there is no space, there's no boundedness, and so you can't have an organizational map to the unlimited sort of networked environment of the web. And part of what the portal does is impose a kind of framework that allows that organizational structure to be embedded in the metadata. All right, so the structuring of metadata has to replace, to some extent, both the catalogs and search and finding aids of a traditional environment and the spatialized storage and organizational distribution of objects within a physical environment. So those are very radical changes. They're conceptual changes. To implement these kinds of conceptual changes is a technical challenge. And the technical challenge, I cannot say this enough times, is an intellectual challenge. It isn't just piping. It isn't just scaffolding. You have to think through the content model, in other words, the model of knowledge according to which metadata is being produced. And you have to think through the relationships between the information structures and the behaviors that are expected and projected and promoted. These are fundamental intellectual issues. And I have to say that I'm really impressed by the way that Joe Shubetowski and his team have thought this through. The mantra here, and I'm looking at my colleagues in the back because I learned a lot of this from them, is keep your repositories separate from use. In other words, if you go to the store and you buy butter, and you buy broccoli and eggs and bread, and you're going to use the butter on the bread, you're going to use the butter on the broccoli, and you're going to use the butter to fry the eggs, you don't buy bread and butter, broccoli and butter, and eggs and butter. You buy butter, you buy broccoli, and you buy eggs. Your larder is a repository. It's combinatoric. Your use of butter is varied, right? Keep your repository, just like always remember this, broccoli, bread, and eggs, all right, and butter. Keep your repository separate from your use. If you lock that butter onto the bread, you're going to have to scrape it off every time you want to fry some eggs. So this kind of thinking is a kind of design thinking that's gone into the technical design and information architecture of the way the portal is thought through. These are not technical issues alone, they're intellectual issues about the way we shape the knowledge environment. The functional requirements for the portal are going to continue to want to meet user expectations. What are user expectations, and what's the long-term sustainability of user expectations? Well, let's see, we want to annotate things, we want to morph them, we want to pull them out, we want to publish with them, we want to data mine them, we want to crosswalk them, we want to aggregate them differently, we want to, we want to publish with them, we want to teach with them, we want to have our own collection, You can see how this, sort of laundry list is going to proliferate. I think it's really important to consider what the cost benefits are for keeping the portal streamlined and for building tools in other environments as APIs that can interface with the deep repository and its elegantly designed functional search capabilities. The portal's going to have plenty to do as it scales up just to manage the information that's within that set of records that are held by the portal. The portal just holds records. Figuring out how to deal with the records effectively so that they continue to be a useful scholarly tool is a sufficient challenge. all these other user expectations can't be loaded onto the portal as functional requirements, or the portal is going to be like a car that you decided should have a kitchen, and then you thought maybe it should have a porch, and then you thought, wouldn't it be nice if the car had a garden, and before you know it, it's not a car anymore. So again, it's this matter of thinking through what the balances are. You can have a garden, and you can have a porch, and you can have a kitchen. You drive your car up to it when you want to. All right, so thinking about how you design these relationships, how we design these relationships ahead is really important. Institutionally, so that's sort of, the conceptual leap, some of the technical issues. Institutionally, one of the really important things, and we heard this from the group of contributors at the end of the morning, and we heard it in part from the team, the designers, is that we have to move away from the silo. That all of the repositories that were built in silo environments simply complicate the capacity to really investigate cultural legacy materials in effective ways. The kind of demonstrations that we saw of looking at issues of style, of looking at economic patterns of collecting and so forth, all of these are only possible if we can look at across interrelated, federated repositories. So the institutional choice to actually think about shared and distributed responsibility, to move away from the silo, to get buy-in for all kinds of activities that will aggregate materials in an effective way. Again, a crucial move. It's still difficult to do technically. It still requires an enormous amount of work. On that point, I just want to say that when I came up actually to talk with Joe and his team, one of the interesting factoids that they revealed to me, I don't know if it was Lainey or Joe or somebody else in the room, and they said, at OCLC, 65% of the staff time just goes to data wrangling, that is to cleaning up the data and making it work. So 65, OCLC, they have a big staff. So thinking about the amount of labor that disappears and the special effects of the screen is something that really bears some reflection. It's enormously labor intensive. It's also enormously intellectually interesting to look at the ways in which metadata do and don't match. And so again, these are really interesting moments, but the institutional commitment to the long-term viability of the portal is a little bit daunting when you start to think about scaling the project up. Just one other little mantra, the machines don't do it. Okay, it's like, there's nothing in the machine. Like, there have to be people, right? The machines don't do it. So I would suggest, again, limiting expectations in terms of the way that the social community builds around the portal, thinking a lot about the fact that the portal can do one thing really, really well, and that we can build other things on top of it that will work well with it if it remains stable and usable. The benefits of the portal in terms of critical bibliography, the content of the corpus of art history, again, a very interesting intellectual social challenge for the community of persons involved in the study of things visual. What is art history? What are its limits? What are its extensions? What are its neighborhoods and zones? I deal with the history of graphic design, charts, diagrams, visualizations. These are really important for the study of visual knowledge production in a digital environment. So we know that the portal is going to grow in terms of, its own kind of negotiations with other visual nations, as it were, visual nations of information. So in sort of wrapping up, because I thought I would try to leave a bunch of time here for questions and talk, what I'm trying to say is that as we continue to examine and reflect on our development of online materials, that we come to terms with the specific affordances of the digital. It is information that is capable of being processed. It can be analyzed in ways that are remarkable. It is highly structured in all circumstances, but it is not done mechanically. And every technical act is an intellectual act that requires human participation and communities of practice. And keeping all of that in mind as we also, again, keep our expectations in check with the realities of limited resources and imaginative, high-end possibilities, it just seems realistic to me in light of our utopian enthusiasm. I'm certainly Miss Pollyanna when it comes to enthusiasm, but I do think a little bit of kind of thinking through how this is all going to unfold is probably useful. So if I were to go back to my original terms of the panoptic and the virtual and the node in the knowledge base, and say instead what we're dealing with now is a well-defined domain of specialized knowledge that is digital and that is informatic and that is a kind of access point or a hub in a networked environment that is extensible and growing and going to continue to aggregate, that the tremendous added value of this act of federation is really, I think, what is making all of us kind of stand back and go, oh, this is truly an amazing moment. Because we know that we have to be able to look across that corpus of cultural legacy in a systematic and integrated way if we're going to be able to ask research questions of a kind that the computational and digital environment affords us. So again, thank you so much for letting me participate in this, and it is really an exciting moment. I'll stop there. So I thought it might be nice to leave time for questions, and they needn't be addressed only to me. We had to sort of cut off our question and discussion points this morning, and I'm sure there are things lingering in folks' minds in response to the presentations that we had earlier in the day and some of the points raised by contributors and scholars.
You've characterized the communities involved in this as the contributors, I guess the supporting staff, and the users. Is there some way we can get away from this idea of separate communities doing different roles and have a more, I guess, a less well-defined interface between them so that people can cross over between roles as they see fit?
Well, I mean, again, in the best of all possible worlds, we have citizen scholars, who are participating in the contribution of intellectual content to high-level authoritative repositories. In the real world, it doesn't really work that way. So, to a great extent, we know, that the processes of getting professional-level, vetted, authoritative data, metadata, and materials into an environment is non-trivial. There's a reason why people, have professional degrees, and that there's a whole profession of people that deal with these materials. So I think it's not so much that the roles divide as much as responsibilities divide, and that if you don't want a repository that has lots and lots of junk in it, you actually have to have a gatekeeping function in terms of how it's developed and built. That said, I think one of the things we've been talking about in terms of use of repositories, and certainly it's true with ArtStore and other environments, is how do you take the work that people do as acts of interpretation, capture them, and make them available as lectures, as search trails, as research profiles, any of those kinds of things, in ways that can be examined, down the road. So I think that's where I say, you have your repository, the scrims, the APIs, the other things that you build on top that allow these different functionalities, whether it's export function or capture function. That's a whole other, set of possibilities. But I know I sound really conservative, but I don't think you want that stuff in the repository. And I don't think that you want to take on, a community like the Getty, a professional community, wants to take on the responsibility of storing, managing, keeping updated, any of that kind of extra material. And others may disagree with me, but I would think that would be a kind of crazy undertaking. I mean, it'd be sort of like, saying that, you're the Museum of Modern Art, and what you want to do is record every interpretive conversation in front of every painting because it could be interesting. And it turns out that what's happening is, so-and-so's turning to their partner and saying, yeah, did you call the plumber about the bathroom? So, that's interesting in a novelistic, curious kind of way, but I don't know. Does people have other opinions about this? I have my own opinions, but Jeff, you have a thought about this?
Oh, usually. It's really wonderful that it's open to anybody, but the sort of citizen scholar concept horrifies me.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if there's any effort to bring in the education departments of some of the partners and some other people to have, even if it goes down to YouTube, how to use this for high school students, for junior college students, for future scholars, or for people who can't afford to, or in some other country might not have access to the typical scholastic community. Are you marketing this as a product to educators and librarians and looking for partners in ways to get other types of people to know what it is and how to use it?
It's not my product, so I'm not doing the marketing. Do you want to say something, Martha?
I'd like to take a stab at answering that. You can't make everybody happy. And one of the things that I'm very fond of saying is that in our own research library, 60% of the materials are not in the English language. So which grade school and high school students are we targeting it to? I know from my students at UCLA, they don't know any other language but English. So to a certain degree, I think that our scholars have shown convincingly how you could use it for teaching, and Irina teaches at the undergraduate level a lot of classes. But we haven't given any thought to bringing in the education departments of museums, and I think that maybe the educators could be a target audience for this, but not the kids or the average museum visitor. That's just my thought.
Well, again, I think, just to come at this from a slightly different direction, and it will annoy Ron because I'm going to go back to these roles again. But again, I think when you make repositories available, as this repository is, it's available. It can be used by any number of people for any number of uses. And the great thing about this is that it is all fully available material. It is not siloed. It's not subscriber-based. And again, just to be really clear, I know you know this, but to be really clear, the Internet Archive is a repository. It's a holding tank. It's a storage environment. It doesn't provide services particularly or use and so forth. So the portal does is by organizing in a central place, and that's going to be its great strength over time, is if it can be the single repository of records where you know that you can go to find things, then anyone who wants to work with those materials will have access to them into quote-unquote perpetuity, that as long as the digital environment stays stable. Building the kinds of interpretive environments, virtual classrooms, those kinds of interpretive materials for all different ages and publics and so forth. I don't think that's the responsibility of the portal. I think that is the opportunity that the portal provides. And certainly I saw this at Virginia, where the Center for Digital History used all of the materials that were part of the repositories there, and worked with the Curry School of Education to create teaching materials aimed specifically at standards of learning in classrooms for teachers who didn't have the time to go through a repository like this. I mean, it's daunting. Where do you start? So they worked with the Curry School to develop lesson plans that used the primary source materials, but specifically tailored to a classroom environment. So I just think, again, this is that opportunity, but I'm not sure it would work. To imagine, that's where the expectations, I think, need to be kept clear about what is this project taking on and what isn't it taking on. So, but it's not up to me to say. It's just, if I were advising them, that's what I would say. So, Jackie? Oh, no. Yeah, and then you can pass the microphone up to the gentleman behind you.
Coming back to your, is it on?
Yeah.
Coming back to your question in a way, once again, one of the ways in which these role boundaries has been broken down a bit is in sites that implement Web 2.0 / social media features in order to permit scholars, students, teachers, whomever, genealogists, people with whatever kind of interest and their own expertise to annotate, add information, add metadata at a level that is much closer than a library can afford to do. Perhaps the most amazing example of this is that the National Library of Australia has put up a huge body of Australian newspapers and it's sort of open for whomever to add indexing information about, from local newspaper articles and such, and something like 15 million of these have been added, and it's good data. But someone mentioned this morning that one of the future thoughts is to add social media kinds of capabilities to the portal. I wonder if any of you could address what you have in mind, or is it too soon to say?
I think some of that's built into the Internet Archive export function, isn't it?
Yeah, I think some of it, no, I can yell about it. I think some of the things we want to do as far as personalization are just so that you can start to build sets of records and collections of records. Some of that's on Hottie, so you could build your own, private sets, and then we could have public sets, and then you can add your own notes and we talked about annotation, and annotation, it sounds like an easy thing, but once you start adding layers of software where you're trying to have a search engine / repository next to kind of a content management type system and how they play nicely together to support annotation. There's some big efforts like the open annotation effort that's going on in the sort of academic communities. There's ways to marry these things together so that we're not trying to, take all the features that everybody else is doing and other stuff and smash them all in. I think we're going to try and start out small and if you can do the sharing social things and we can build that sort of my portal kind of stuff in there, I think that'll go a long ways. And then we just need some feedback. we need people to use it. We need people to write and say, oh my God, you're a moron, you should be doing X with it. And then we'll go, okay, well, that's interesting. And that 65% number, I got that from Gunter, okay?
Yeah, I think, and this is something that Johanna has taught me, the portal can't, and as I said before, the portal can't be all things to all people. And we also have to think, where do these annotation tools live? Maybe they don't have to live inside the portal. We're also working on some other projects, and I know other people like Stephanie Wood and many people around the country and around the world are working on annotation tools, but you might not necessarily put them inside a federated environment like this. The scholar might have the annotation tool in their own scholar's workspace. Because, again, it's great that Johanna keeps talking about another tattoo. The machines don't do it. The machines didn't do it. Joe and Laney did it, and all of us in the working group mapping all the metadata and analyzing the content and so forth. So we really have to be really careful, too, about the expectations that we raise, the promises that we make. Jackie, you know this because it's the user, in theory, wants everything.
Yeah.
But,
You can't manage all that data, and it's also not necessary. In other words, there's plenty of social media APIs that already allow you to, track a research trail, share it with somebody else, post it to Twitter, put it on Facebook, repurpose it. If this then that, it's like all that stuff. As a user, you can share with anybody you want to on social media sites. So I think my sense is that keeping these things distinct, those social media apps, those API things, they get obsolete so fast. And you don't want to build in things that are going to have quick obsolescence life cycles. The repository is clean. The repository and the records is a huge project. And I think thinking about how do you do computational analysis, data mining, visualization within the portal site of the materials that are central to the portal makes some sense, but these other kind of, bells and whistles, again, I'm sounding really conservative, but it's just, I guess I'm really in awe and admiration of the amount of technical effort and work that's going to be involved in trying to scale the portal and sustain it. It's huge. I mean, it's just huge. So thinking about it that way, it's like, well, if you start to add on these other features, I think it just becomes, a thing that has no definition at that point. But again, it's not up to me. I'm just, voicing my sense of caution about expectations and technical realities. You had a question or comment or whatever.
Yeah, I was just going to ask, I know as a fan of history that I am, the more I realize, the more I find out about things that happen in history, the more I'm wondering what else happened that I don't know about. And I can see how this can be a very powerful tool. And as you're getting different libraries to come online and provide content, I'm wondering, you must have a pecking order of places that you would love to get content from, be it China, the Vatican. Are there any issues to barriers that you've run into just yet, or are you seeing no barriers to getting that access?
I'm going to defer to Joe and Mirtha on this.
I don't think we have a particular pecking order. I think we're trying to target institutions, first of all, again, big issue, that actually have a significant amount of text digitized, which is not the case in a lot of institutions. We want to extend it more to non-Western, so we're looking at some of our Chinese and Taiwanese colleagues, institutions, but there is, Debbie Kemp said, well, Joe and Laney did it all, it wasn't any work for us, but it's not really true. I mean, the contributing institution has to do a certain amount of work to prepare the data so that it can be harvested by us. So I don't think we have a particular pecking order. I mean, one of the things we're going to do now is maybe try to develop some kind of a collection development policy and see which institutions we want to target that have significant amounts of digitized text that would increase the breadth and depth of what's in the portal now.
Yeah, and that's probably a good place to sort of wrap things up is to think about, again, going back to some of the comments that we've heard about where's the user contribution, is that, individual collectors, private collections, materials in private hands, creating a template and a kind of environment for materials to come into consideration. In other words, be uploaded for, have a record created. But how stable are those materials? Will they continue to be there and so forth is always a question. And the other big problem, of course, that we'll have as we go forward is this problem of 1923. And I think, one of the really important challenges for all of us is to advocate for open access for published materials and to start to make a case for rethinking the way that copyright has been reconfigured by interests that are not scholarly and not in the public interest. And I'll just say, because Thomas asked me to say so, that there's a group of people involved with the Association for Computing and the Humanities who are involved with starting to think with a number of lawyers about the ways in which a distinction between what's called, and Jackie or somebody will know this much better than I do, but expressive and non-expressive forms of use might be a way to rethink copyright. And especially when you think about digital publications, where the way in which you're accessing materials is by pointing to them rather than by, in a sense, publishing them. The questions about how we might really make a huge conceptual leap towards rethinking copyright is, I think, one of the areas where we have the need for as many advocates and as wide a community of informed practitioners and public as we can manage. So again, thank you all for allowing me to participate today.